Hello and welcome, one and all, to North Carolina Museum Week. This program brought to you by the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. Thanks all for tuning in. Thanks for joining us. My name is Chris Smith. I'm curator for the SECU Daily Planet Theater in beautiful downtown Raleigh. And this week has been designated by the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources, DNCR, as NC Museum Week. So all week long, museums and institutions all over are going to be celebrating museums, their collections, the work they do in communities all across the state. And the Museum of Natural Sciences, being the largest institution of its kind in North Carolina, we're here for the party too. But it's not just me who's hanging out all week long. Today at 1, of course, and then Tuesday through Friday at noon, we'll be joined by museum curators to talk about collections. That's right. We've decided for our theme for NC Museum Week to discuss natural history collections, right? What is the work of a natural history museum in preserving history in a way, and in the science that we do, and what does the future look like for a natural history collection? Jars and cabinets full of specimens. To kick off the program, I want to introduce you to the director of the Museum of Natural Sciences, Dr. Eric Dorfman. Eric, welcome.
Hi, Chris. Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thanks for joining us. It's really exciting to have you here to sort of kick off Museum Week as we begin a conversation about museum collections. Now, everybody, Dr. Dorfman is fairly new to Raleigh and fairly new to the Museum of Natural Sciences. He just joined the museum at the start of 2020, brand new director. Formerly, he was the director of the Carnegie Museum of Natural History in Pittsburgh and has written extensively about museums as well. So we're very glad to have you in Raleigh with us, of course, Eric, and to get your perspectives on collections and what collections mean.
Thank you. Well, collections are really one of the fundamental building blocks. Well, in fact, the fundamental building block of natural history museums, and really what makes a natural history museum different from every other kind of museum is having a natural history collection. So one way or another, all roads lead to that collection. So it's a great theme for this Museum Week series of presentations, and I'm so excited to be able to kind of explore those with everybody today, some of those ideas. So go ahead. No, please.
I was going to go ahead and let everybody who's watching know real quick that as the conversation continues, feel free to post comments and questions for Eric in the chat. We'll be getting to those just a little bit later in the program and posing those. But let us know what your thoughts are as the conversation goes. The first question, though, to get things started, Eric, would be sort of what is a natural history collection briefly, and then why are they so important?
Sure, of course. So natural history collections, well, if you think about it from their history, the people have been collecting pieces of natural history since ancient Egypt, really. People have always been really fascinated with the things of nature, and some of them are easily accessible to just pick up and stick in your pocket and bring home. And so really the very first collections were things that people loved, that, you know, the ancient Romans took seashells back with them when they were on their travels and brought them home. And then later on, they became really a source of prestige. You know, some of the great collections in the world were from emperors and kings who could afford limitless resources to put in these collections. But for me, sort of at their foundation, they're about what people love about nature and bringing them back, and they become evidence. In the early days, they were evidence of where you had been, but nowadays they're evidence of change, right? So we have we have large collections because we want to understand how change, say, a population changes over space. So North Carolina might be different from West Virginia, and the animals or the plants that we would have in those collections allow us to say with some certainty what is the difference between this geographical range. But we can also do it over time. You know, the museum has been going since 1859, and actually the earliest collections of the museum date to even earlier. And so we can say, how do these do our collections change? So maybe birds are getting bigger, or plants are getting smaller, or they're flowering earlier, which we actually know is the case in many parts of the United States. So that's really exciting, to look at big scale patterns. But equally, every individual in that collection has a story to tell too. It had a relationship with its environment. So a recent interesting study was done where they were looking at, the researchers were looking at changes in pollution tucked into the bird's feathers, right? So every individual has a story to tell, many different stories to tell, of course. And that's why DNA allows us to unlock a whole other set of stories. But even so, when an individual animal was collected, oftentimes there's what's called metadata. So what the animal was doing when it died or when it was killed, what its family size was, what calls maybe it took. And sometimes you don't even need a physical animal. You might have a recording, which also goes, or a film. Those also go into the collection. So there's many different ways of doing it. But to me, probably nowadays, one of the most important things is that, just like way back in the earliest days of collecting, our collections allow us to unlock curiosity and excitement in everybody who looks at them, whether it's little kids seeing a dinosaur specimen for the first time, or a scientist discovering a new spider. All these things come together and excite us on a sort of emotive level, as well as advancing scientific data collection.
And so how do collections then contribute to conservation in particular? Something that the museum's concerned about.
Yes, that's a really important thing, because of course, as we know, the environment is in a lot of trouble. There are many species going extinct. And museum collections actually have a really important role to play. One of them is understanding, well, there's something called cryptic species. So cryptic species, it would be two different organisms that actually look the same when you see them. So understanding that conservation efforts have to work on the level of the species, knowing that, say, two turtles that might look identical but have genetically distinct are genetically distinct organisms, might be the way to doing the genetics on this kind of work is evidence for species being different, and then individual conservation actions can happen as a result. So that's one way that collections can help. But another way is that, because over time we're collecting species and we're understanding what populations are doing, we're also able to say, look, this population is dying out. You may not realize it, but it was found 10 years ago. It was found in 5 different locations. Now it's only found in 2. And that can sound an alarm bell of a species that may be really hard to see. It may be hiding all the time, or maybe it's at night. It's active at night. So those sorts of things can also really help when we look at large-scale long-term patterns.
So you mentioned that the Museum of Natural Sciences, we have specimens going back to at least the mid 1800s.
Yeah.
So we have more than 100 years of data and information. But what does all that look like
Right. Well,
to
see, this is
somebody?
the interesting thing too, because we have an important collection of 4.5 million objects or specimens, but it's contributing to a global network of organisms in museum collections, millions and millions of collection items all over. So there's a whole network. It's not just ours in isolation. So what our collection physically looks like is um, drawers full of small items like shells, jars full of things like um, uh, reptiles and amphibians, or there's also larger drawers with things like birds in them, mounted specimens that would be mammals in some cases. So there's large, very large organisms. There's also minute, but there's also the real power comes in the data that's collected. So every time you collect an organism from the wild, if it's a bird that flies into the window or an insect that goes into a light trap, you write down all of the information about that individual organism, and that forms a global data set. If that data set were somehow dissociated with those organisms, the organisms would be almost worthless. And so this is absolutely key. And so most people think about a collection. In fact, I'll just share a little photo with you. Here we go. So this is what most people think of as a collection. This is the bird collection from the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. And so we just think of drawers and drawers full of animals, and physically that is what it looks like. But the most important thing about it is the data that sits on a computer bank somewhere that most people never really think about. But we're also really, it's exciting that at the museum, we're also starting to 3D scan a lot of our objects. And you can get online now and log on to the museum's website and look at some of these objects. We have some great paleontology objects like dinosaurs and early plants that you can spin around and look from every position just as if you're holding it yourself. So nowadays, that's the kind of thing that really enlivens our collections. So again, we're moving away from just having an object in a drawer to making it so much more meaningful.
Is that the future then for a natural history collection? Is the data being available digitally in an online platform? Or what are other ways that 4.5 million specimens collected
Right.
become maybe more accessible, but also modern and relevant?
Well, so there really, on a level, there are a number of ways that we're looking at modernizing the collection, and I agree with what you said just then. It's so important to keep modern. We have to keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible, because a collection that is not modernized just is left in the dust, and people don't understand its relevance, and people aren't then going to use it. So there's a number of ways. One is that obvious way of digitizing it, making it available online for people to look at. But at the moment, you really have to know what you're looking for, right? So if I want to get on and I want to see, some arcane pine tree species from the Cretaceous period, I'm going to know what I'm looking for and I can get down in there. But I think we need to, where the future of collections is going, is making it not only physically accessible through online things, but also intellectually accessible, where we start to create patterns and make those patterns accessible to people in a more user-friendly way. So that's part of it. And one thing that I think about right now is a fantastic analogy to that is in the museum, the nature center, where we look at, where you can take RFD tags, put this specimen on a plate, on a big platform, and see all sorts of information about it. And that's the kind of thing, I think, once we get a little bit more sophisticated with our digital offer, this is the kind of thing that you should be able to do with specimens right across the collection, as opposed to just the few that we have now. But equally, being able to draw patterns and then make those patterns accessible, not just the individual specimens, those are the things that are going to be really really important. So what do we do with those data? Do we make documentaries out of them? Do we write popular articles or books about them? So those are things too. What are the results of what we're doing, and how are those results meaningful to people's daily lives? So that's another stream of activity we need to think about.
And that sounds like a solution that would make natural history research, or researchers who might use specimens, or folks interested in science,
Yeah.
it makes things more interdisciplinary, right? Like maybe you don't
Absolutely.
know the family, genus, species for that Cretaceous
That's right.
pine, but if there's a way it's made available to you, then you can still absorb information about it.
Well, and that's exactly why the thing, like what we're doing this week during Museum Week, is so important. Unlocking the collections for people in a forum like this is wonderful, because you can start to give a more user-friendly look and make the collections more relevant to people. Why do I care how many hummingbirds you have in your collection? Well, here's why. This is why it makes a difference. So that to me is a very exciting, and this is the first time I've ever done anything like this, talk about collections in an open forum. So this is also really fun for me as well.
So I'm thinking for the rest of the week, we're going to be talking to the research curators and some of the collections managers for some of the research units at the museum. And their jobs are to think about how to maintain the collections, improve them. They help make them accessible. They look for tools and grants and resources. They work with scientists who are coming in. But your job is way up at the top, fifth floor of the museum. Your office looks out over the top of, the Acrocanthosaurus skeleton, for example.
Yes, the best view in Raleigh.
It's a pretty good one. I've been able to peek at it from a distance. I'm teasing. But how do you as a director think about collections? Like, what is the role of a museum director in thinking about and working with the rest of the team to shape a collection?
Well, so one of my goals, one of my jobs, is to understand and help develop the voice of the museum overall. So for instance, I believe that conservation is very important, and that an institution like ours should be looking at ways that we can conserve the planet and preserve its biodiversity. So that institutional direction helps inform the kind of recruitment that we do, the kind of resources that we put into the development of collections, and into telling the stories that those collections can unlock. So that's just one example. I also part of my job is also to help promote the work of the museum. I mean, doing exactly what I'm doing right now, talking to people about how magnificent our collections are and how important the research that comes out of it is and how it contributes to a world view of natural biodiversity is part of my work. And then also the work of any leader in an institution like ours is to enthuse those people who want to support it, want to engage with it, and in a meaningful way. So those are, that helps round out the capabilities of our research in general, of our institution in general. So unlocking all those potentials and providing resources so that those amazing people who are working in our institution actually can do the science and go on the field trips that end up in specimens coming into the collection. All that plays a part of it.
I'm going to turn to the chat boxes now and see what our viewers are thinking. I'll remind everybody, if there's something on your mind, question or comment, leave it for us in the chat or there in the comment box, and we'll grab those and pose those as we go. The first one that popped up here comes from Alex. How are specimens collected in the first place? And were any specimens originally donated from the general public?
Right. Well, I will first of all, I can talk in generalities, but as Chris said, I'm fairly new. So understanding how any individual organism got into our collection, I don't know, but I can certainly talk about other institutions that I've been at. And so the answer is yes. Individuals do often give specimens in. For instance, one that I contributed to the Carnegie collection, was just walking down the street and I saw this beautiful cuckoo that had flown into the window of a building and had fallen dead at the base of it. And so I wrapped it up and got it into a freezer and brought it into the institution, having written down all the information. And that's really important. If anybody ever thinks they want to collect something that is special and might go to a museum, make sure that you write down all that information, where it was, what time it was, what day, any other information about it, because that will travel with that animal or plant wherever it goes. And so how museums now get their collections is by and large different from the way it used to be. So you go back to the 19th century and there were a lot of special collecting trips where people would go and they would basically shoot everything they saw, collect it, especially in places that were unknown to science. That was a very, very common thing, and a lot of major institutions got their foundation that way. Nowadays, we do a lot less of that, especially in the United States. It's not really, it's not considered proper to do that. We do still do things like that with insects and other species as part of research experiments. So even things like frogs and fish are sometimes taken into the collection through going out, trying to understand what an animal is, what an ecosystem looks like, and then they'll take what is known as voucher specimens. So they're, again, very carefully considered when they're taken into the collection in that way. Another thing that happens that people may not think about, and this does happen quite a bit, is that when an animal dies in the zoo, it will often end up in a museum, especially if it's something exotic for display, for a diorama or something like that. That's often what happens to zoo animals that pass away. And then finally, museums, smaller museums that are closing or want to divest themselves of old specimens that have a lot of historical data will often give them to larger museums. And that has happened with us. We have inherited some very large collections over the decades.
Martha is asking, how do you make your collections accessible to researchers and the general public?
Right. Very good question. So one of the things that we do very actively, and all museums do this, is loan specimens to each other. So every big museum has has a team that boxes up specimens of special request by a researcher at another museum or at a university, and we are also collecting, not collecting, sorry, but exchanging loan objects going inward as well.
Mm-hmm.
And sorry, what was the first part of the question? Oh, how do we make it accessible? Mm-hmm. So that the first line of defense in that is making it available online. So most of our collections are available. If you go to our collection portal on our website, you can see lists of all kinds of species or individual organisms that are in our collection. Again, it really helps to know what you're looking for, but that is specifically aimed at other researchers who might want to know. Let's say I want a falcon that's in another institution. I can go and look at their collections online, and I can look for my falco species and see if they have it. But to make it more accessible to the public, we're also starting to enliven that portal with 3D scans, with imagery, so that more people can access it in different ways. Other museums have taken that even a step further, where you can create your own collection, a virtual collection, by going through a menu of beautiful photographs of their objects and bringing them into one place. So that's all there to be done.
Now, this is a fun question that came in. Do you have any personal collections?
Personal collections?
It looks like books.
Well, I do. I have a lot of books. So interesting. I'm more like the ancient Romans. I collect. Here, I'll show you something I collected.
Oh, okay, cool. Oh, we're gonna get a sneak peek, everybody.
So here's. I collect things from places I've been. So this is a lotus head that I got while I was doing my postdoc in Kakadu National Park in the top end of Australia. This is a piece of coral that I actually bought at my very first gem and mineral show in Tucson, Arizona. So I collect things that are meaningful to me rather than things that all of a type. I do actually collect some pottery, so I'm very excited to be now living in North Carolina, where there is so much wonderful ceramic work happening. But that's off to the side. I don't have any major natural history collections, though.
Excellent, excellent. Let's see. Oh, Megan McCullough is here, collections manager for non-molluscan invertebrates.
Yes.
Hi, Megan.
Hi, Megan.
Megan commented that the oldest specimens in non-molluscan invertebrates are Atlantic white shrimp from 1855.
Oh, wow. Fantastic.
That were
Thank you.
Part of, she wrote that they were part of the Charleston Museum acquisition from not too many years ago.
There's a perfect example of acquiring something from another museum that extends our reach backward, and really every time we do that, it expands our ability to tell stories. And whether we're telling them in a scientific arena or a public arena, it is still all about telling stories.
Do you have a favorite story of a specimen? In general, not necessarily from North Carolina.
Oh,
is there anything that stands top of mind? Just curiosity here as we begin to wrap things up.
Well, The specimen story that I find most fascinating is actually the first Diplodocus ever found, which was in Montana, I believe. So it was so Andrew Carnegie was sitting at home reading the paper, and he opened it up to say, look, this giant bone was discovered. And he said to the head of the museum at the time, get that for Pittsburgh. That was a sort of a famous quote. And so that really started the whole, what's the word? Well, it's been called in a book, Bone Wars, you know, that it really set off what would you call it? This love of and desire for dinosaur specimens. It was like a gold rush for paleontology. And so this was, I mean, to me, this whole thing, and it's actually called Diplodocus carnegii after Andrew Carnegie, who funded the expedition that exhumed it from where it was. And so, I mean, to me, it's that kind of thing that I find so interesting, where a natural history specimen will interact with human history and really change people's perception of the natural world. I find that kind of thing very, very exciting.
Nice, nice. Well, that looks like, I think I got the questions from the chat, and it looks like our time is up. We wanted to keep these to a nice, tidy half hour, keep
Great.
everybody happy, and let everybody get to the rest of their Monday doings. Eric, thanks so much for being a part of NC Museum Week.
Thanks, Chris. It was really fun. Enjoyed it.
Great to hear your perspective, and look forward to seeing you in the museum when the time comes.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in for NC Museum Week. We'll be back here on YouTube with more about our collections, so you can hear from ichthyology, ornithology, herpetology, and malacology, our mollusk collection. That's Tuesday through Friday. We'll be back here at noon the rest of the week. So check out naturalsciences.org. You can get more information about NC Museum Week there and see the schedule of events for the rest of the week, or check out the museum on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're at Natural Sciences. Until tomorrow at noon, we'll see you again soon. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.